Hello there, I'm Black Bright News, and I just wanted to talk about a headline I saw in MSN, and it says, "White men are apparently terrified of doing the wrong thing at work." So I just wanted to share my thoughts with you on that after having read it and looked through it, okay? So there's a headline doing the rounds this week that's landed with a thud rather than a bang. White men are apparently terrified of doing the wrong thing at work. Will join the club. And already, before we even get to the substance, you can feel the temperature rise because that opening line isn't neutral. It's not curious, it's knowingly sharp. It's saying, in effect, welcome to feeling what many others have lived with for decades. The article centres on a new YouTube series called White Men Can't Work, fronted by Tim Samuels, a former BBC documentary maker. The claim is stark that millions of men, particularly white middle-aged men, are now walking around on eggshells at work, unsure what they're allowed to say, fearful of being misunderstood, worried that being male itself has become a career risk. And the article doesn't entirely reject that claim, but it doesn't embrace it either. Instead, it circles it, it pokes it, it reframes it, and it quietly asks, what is going on here? One of the key examples offered is Chaz Bayfield, an advertising director in his 50s, who successfully won a sex discrimination claim after being made redundant. His offence, according to the account, was questioning a colleague's vow to obliterate the company's white privileged male image. For him, that language felt personal, threatening even. He asked what it meant for people like him, not, he says, to undermine equality, but to understand his place in it. Shortly after, he was gone. Now, it's tempting to treat this as a smoking gun, proof that men who ask questions about diversity are punished. But one case doesn't make a pattern, and the article knows that. Still, it uses the story to illustrate something subtler. How emotionally charged workplaces have become, how language now carries real professional weight, and how uncertainty, even if it isn't backed by statistics, can feel real enough to shape behaviour. But then the article does something important. It widens the lens because the fear described here, the sense of watching over your shoulder, worrying if you're next on the list, wondering how you'll survive financially if your job disappears in your 50s, that fear is not unique to white men. It never has been. It's the fear of ageing in an economy that no longer rewards loyalty, that prizes adaptability over experience, that quietly suggests you're replaceable long before you're ready to believe it. What is distinctive, though, is that many men were raised to expect work to be solid ground. Identity aside, work was supposed to be the one place where effort translated into security. You showed up, you do your job, you keep your head down, and in return you get stability, dignity and future you can plan around. When that promise weakens, the loss isn't just financial, it's existential. And that's where the emotional undercurrent of this story really sits. Because alongside the fear of redundancy is another quieter fear, not knowing who you're allowed to talk to about it. The article asks, almost in passing, whether enough middle-aged men have people in their lives they can confide in about this. In truth, an almost universal anxiety. And that question lingers. Many don't, not really. Vulnerability was never something men were trained to practice socially. Worry, doubt, fear of irrelevance, these things often stay internal, unnamed and unshared. So when change accelerates, cultural change, generational change, economic change, it doesn't always come out as thoughtful reflection. Sometimes it comes out as defensiveness, sometimes resentment, sometimes as a story about being singled out, when the deeper wound is about feeling unmoored. The article's open line, "Well, join the club," gestures towards another truth for women, for people of colour, for anyone who didn't fit the default mode, work has long required self-monitoring, watching your tone, calibrating your words, managing how you're perceived. For many, eggshells weren't new, they were structural. The discomfort white men are now articulating feels to others like a late arrival to the long-running reality, almost like welcome to the party. And yet, and this matters, recognizing that history doesn't mean dismissing present fear. Two things can be true at once. It can be true that workplace anxiety has long been unevenly distributed, and it's also and it's also true that rapid cultural shifts can leave people genuinely unsettled. Compassion doesn't require agreement, it requires attention. Toward the end, the article turns to parents and to children. A third of white men worry their sons will have worse opportunities than they did. But then comes the quiet, unsettling question. How do they feel about their daughters? And beyond that, a broader finding that for over a decade now, parents of all backgrounds have increasingly believed their children won't do better than they did. This is where the story stops being about white men altogether. Because when expectations of progress collapse, everyone feels it. When the ladder looks broken, people start arguing about who's standing on which rung, instead of asking why the ladder isn't being fixed. Identity becomes the language we reach for because it's available, visible, emotionally charged, even when the underlying problem is structural insecurity. What this article is really circling is a moment of transition, a workforce in flux, a culture renegotiating its values, an economy that no longer guarantees a soft landing, and people, many people, trying to understand where they fit in a story that no longer feels predictable. So perhaps the most useful response isn't to scoff or to endorse or to inflame. Perhaps it's to slow the conversation down, to separate fear from blame, to ask better questions. What does fairness look like when resources feel scarce? How do workplaces create inclusion without breeding silence? How do we talk about change without turning uncertainty into a grievance? And maybe, most importantly, how do we make room for honest conversations? Not performative ones, not defensive ones, but human ones, where people can say, I don't fully understand this yet, and I'm afraid of getting it wrong. Hold on. I've dropped my thing. Where am I? And I'm afraid of getting it wrong. Sorry about this. Because if we can do that, then this story doesn't have to be another cultural skirmish. It can be what it actually is beneath the headline, a snapshot of people trying imperfectly to find their footing in a world where the old assurances no longer hold. And that quietly is something almost everyone can recognise. So it does appear that what a lot of values and behaviours were taken for granted back in the past, it's almost like a spotlight is being shone. White men maybe more than others may feel more like victims because they never used to have to be accountable. The white privilege, they never had to be accountable. They could say what they like, how they like, and it didn't matter who they offended. But now it seems as though, just like everybody else, you have to be careful what you say, you have to be careful that you don't offend, and all those kind of things. All those considerations are being taken into account. So like I said in this article, the white men that they're referring to in this article are feeling a lot of what other people, marginalised people, have been feeling for a very long time. So I hope this was useful and informative, and let me have your thoughts. And I think I'm going to stop it there. Have a good evening, and that's all for now. You take care now. Bye-bye.